All right, welcome everyone. So I'm Melanie Schlotterbeck. I'm in charge of the Central Coast region for the Power and Nature Coalition. And today we have a guest speaker, Krystian Lahage from the Mojave Desert Land Trust. And he has an extensive history in public policy, whether it's for Orange County or Senator Feinstein or working on desert issues. And he's going to present today to walk us through how to work with elected officials. And based on what I know of public policy and working with elected officials, people don't always agree with where you stand on things. And so we're hoping to get some pointers and tips on how we can be more successful with that. So, Krystian, I'll pass it over to you. And if folks could mute in the meantime so that we get a nice, quiet recording, we'll have questions at the end, and then, but feel free to type them into the chat and we can get to those after. And Krystian, we have what, about 20 minutes for you and then questions?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I won't take too long, so I'll save plenty of time for questions. And just wanted to say thank you for the nice introduction and glad to be here with all of you folks. Originally from not the Central Coast, but from the coast, so always like talking to folks that are closer to the ocean than I am now. As Melanie said, I was the field representative for Senator Feinstein for about 6 years. Her senior field rep for Orange County, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. I love the desert. I'm so glad to be out here, and now I'm currently working on advocacy to our elected officials, and right now that looks like defense. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you all about kind of the process of how do we plan to meet with an elected official, how do we make ourselves as effective as possible, and what kind of tips can we use to reach across the aisle, bring across different sectors, and really leave an impact. Because what ultimately we want to do is have a relationship, not just a one-off meeting with these folks. So without further ado, I will go ahead and jump in. Oops, let me actually present the slideshow, though. That would help. There we go. Okay, so what are our goals when we're talking to legislators and kind of what, as I say here, how do we go beyond the talking points and of what our goal is? We're not just going to meet with them for one particular issue, although that might be one of our objectives. What is our actual, what are we pursuing by creating a dialogue? So some of the actions that you are going to want to achieve in elected outreaches, the record of their stances and actions. You can't get that if you just talk to them once. You'll only get one snapshot of where they are at that moment. So meeting with them, having a relationship lets you see how they change over time, respond to your advocacy, respond to the advocacy of your volunteers and your members. Maybe where you're currently at, environmental groups aren't extremely influential with an elected. So you need to demonstrate support of other key groups, veterans, off-roaders, hunters, anglers, whatever else there might be outside of just the conservation box. Maybe there is a critical action that you need them to take something on. Right now, we're looking at threats to all of the national monuments in the country, so that's a critical thing you might want to talk about. Assistance with federal and state agencies. I don't know if we have any other land trusts on the line, but those of us who currently work with federal agencies right now know how challenging that has been under the current circumstances. Sometimes members of Congress, or if you're talking about a state agency, members of the state legislature can help you dislodge an issue when it gets stuck with an agency. And then finally, actually building a record of asks and accountability. They're not going to say yes every single time you do this, but what you want to do as you're meeting is keep track of when you ask them to do something and whether they did it or not. Ultimately gets into accountability, which we'll talk a little bit during this call, but you can't be accountable and hold someone accountable if you've never asked them for something in the first place. Simply there being news articles or some other group having asked, if you want to participate in accountability, you need to participate in the front end, which is actually asking them and getting to know them before you pass the judgment, so as it were. So what we're going to do today is a little exercise that I do with our advocacy training groups. We train folks from the community so that they can get into office hours with our local electeds. So today I'm going to walk through a little creation of our fictitious member of Congress. We're going to talk about federal level for the example, but really these tips can apply to anything. So today we're looking at the fictitious Representative John Smith. So we're looking at him. He is a 52-year-old married with two kids. He lives in the fictional forest town. He's a moderate Republican. And his district is a mix of rural and urban, and with lakes, a bunch of recreational areas, and the Desert National Park. And he is a former U.S. Marine Corps veteran and moved to from Los Angeles to his mountain community and opened a real estate business that caters to tourism and vacation rentals. He ran for Congress and won in 2020. And as we've talked about, his district is a mix of natural and urban places. Recreation is the top income. That's very popular there. It's what brings tourists. And wildfires are also very common. During his time in Congress, he's focused on wildfire prevention, veterans benefits, small business, and he believes that public lands should be balanced between their economical considerations and conservation. So you don't need to memorize any of this. We're just going to use it as an example to show from the beginning when we've identified our target, Representative John Smith here, we're not ready to go meet him just because we know who he is and we have a couple of issues. We need to actually get to know this person, organize what our strategy is going to look like, how we're going to approach them. Because I'm guessing all of us here have reached out to an office and found that our typical messaging around environmentalism or endangered species or air quality falls flat with certain folks. Maybe they're just way more into development. Maybe they're preeminently concerned with wildfires, but don't really get into the recreation side of public lands. So we have to kind of look at who they are and decide how we're going to talk to them about what we care about to make them care about it. So one of the first things I like to do, and we're going to kind of extrapolate this out here, is create what we call a strategy map. So a strategy map kind of helps spread out all the information that you need for this person, and you can add to it. It can be in your head too, right? I'm not advocating that you need to create one of these for each of your folks. I think it's helpful, but you can kind of do this in your head, and it helps you just pull apart who is this person as a politician, but also as another human being, because that's ultimately how we're going to make those connections. So yes, we can look at his committees and caucuses. All members of Congress and at the state legislature, this is true as well, are members of committees or caucuses. Committees are smaller groups of folks with subject matter expertise or sometimes just an interest in a topic. And so whenever a bill is introduced that applies to that topic, they're the first folks to vet it. So you can kind of have an idea that if someone's on a committee about, for example, for Mr. Smith, natural resources or veterans affairs, you can go talk to either of those issues about them, and you don't really need much more of a justification. Those are, that's part of their job, that's part of their portfolio. Caucuses are less formal kind of groups of similar legislators. So right now we're actually lucky to have a public lands caucus. It's brand new. It is bipartisan and only has equal members from each party. So it's a great ask when you're looking at this, especially if you want to have your elected buy-in a little bit more to being a public lands champion. So I think the committees are a little bit more obvious, but let's jump into why we actually want to know the rest about this person, right? In terms of their biography. So if we look at they moved from LA to this town 25 years ago, pretty common story for a lot of our communities where folks moved from the city, maybe back during COVID, and came in here. Same time, he opened a real estate practice, and we all know that, the Airbnb and all of that good stuff. But we also know that after, the Airbnb's been reined in a little, there are still communities all over our state that rely on tourism, that rely on people coming to rent places, to come, go to the lake, go to the trails, eat at the restaurants nearby, all of these type of things. So we might want to approach Representative Smith again, knowing that he has an economic preference for public lands on that side of the issue, rather than talking about what endangered owl lives in the trees or, what development we oppose. Instead, we want to come through the back door with the area that he's already in agreement on. Another area here that we want to evaluate and why we want to know everything about these folks is you might have something in common, has nothing to do with policy, but it's going to make a difference. When you walk in, and let's say, for instance, that you're also a veteran, maybe in the Marine Corps, maybe in another service, that's a great way to start the conversation. You know that this person is a Marine Corps veteran. It's something that you have in common. You both went to boot camp. You both, were there for however long. That's an area where you can talk as humans without any of the political portion of it, and it'll make them remember you, whether it's the staff or the elected. You've done something more than just share an article from online or just make your ask. You made a human connection. And so I can't talk about this section enough because in some areas in our districts that we're working on, We have learned that a member of Congress had a daughter who works for the National Park Service. We learned that her husband takes walks every day in the national forest, and picks up litter on his own, and that she wanted someone to go with him. And ultimately, we were able to put someone together that could take a congresswoman's husband on hikes and kind of just talk positively about public lands during that time. So it's not always a straightforward approach of just coming in with your ask. Find out who this person is because you might know them, or you might have someone in your community who knows them. All of these are kind of doors in to get to know them as a person and to make them want to engage with you. They're going to pick the meeting of the person who is super warm, friendly, and has something in common, over the folks that come in and yell at them. It's not the way it should be, but it is the way it is. And of course, policy is important to take a look at, right? We don't want to put our foot in our mouth and come in and ask them to oppose something that they support or vice versa. We have to pick our battles. So if we're fighting a public land sell-off, maybe we're not going to spend too much time critiquing the fact that they supported some budget cuts last year, especially if they're open to opposing a public land sell-off. So you can see here, that Representative Smith is introduced wildfire funding bills. So that's a great door into public lands. On the other hand, he supported the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and supported some cuts. I'm not gonna, I want to start on a good foot. I'm not gonna come in and start talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That's done and said. It's passed. I don't have to agree with the fact that that the congressman supported it, but I'm gonna compartmentalize that and move on to the things that I can work proactively with him. And that's whatever the issue of the day is for you in your region today. And then we know that he supports strategic mining. So again, we kind of have an idea of we can balance on the scales what asks we're likely to get headway with and prioritize those. And then again, other information. Two of the largest wildfires in the state were in his hometown. He has spoken out against the firings in the local national park. So there's an area to thank him and to kind of encourage more of that similar behavior. And he wants a balance between conservation and the economy. And so that puts it on us to share how public lands serve the economy. So through this, there could be a million branches here, right? These are just examples, but it really is helpful to do this. One of our congressperson, for example, we learned trains folks how to fly airplanes, and we do eco flights where we fly folks over national monuments. That's a great connection to tie into a hobby he already has to get him onto a tour that he's been more reluctant to take. So we have to think outside of the box, and you can't do that without knowing who you're talking about, and not just knowing who they are when they show up on CNN or Fox, but knowing who they are when they go home and they're not on social media, they're not doing their politician thing. You'll be surprised how far it can take you. Of course, the other stuff is still important. So we're going to continue to talk about that a little bit. So you've identified your target, you've figured out who they are generally. Now you got to get in there and actually have a meeting with them and put this information to work. And certainly you can go at it alone, but there's a lot of challenges to going at it alone and a lot of strengths that you get from bringing a group together. So one of the first things you want to do when you're building a group, figure out what the purpose is. Why are you going to this? And that helps you determine who you're building here, building into your group. Typically, it's best if one of you, a coalition leader and member, is the leader for your group because you might have a group that's a mixture of folks who are business leaders, some of your volunteers, folks that don't have the same granular understanding that you do. It also makes folks a lot more comfortable when they have someone that they feel they can fall back onto. And us as the folks doing this every day, we're the best positioned for that. Look at your legislator strategy map. So you know what you want to ask. Let's say we're opposing public land sell-offs, just for an example here. What voices are going to be most effective with Representative Smith? Well, I know he's a Marine veteran. I know he cares about wildfires, and I know he cares about tourism, real estate. Those are three groups right there. So you can kind of see how you can use the strategy map to work backwards to build your smaller campaign group or your coalition or just the group that you're bringing in for this Saturday's meeting, whatever it may be. You can build multiple groups. And this is something that I also highly advise. It's very difficult to have a group go in and be the warm, friendly group and also be the group that brings accountability at the end. It's hard to be the group that is talking about the environment, but also brings a balanced stance on economics and on development. You can have multiple groups who can speak to those different strengths. And I actually immensely support doing that because not only does it make it look like you have all of these different representatives from different sectors of the community, that's a force multiplier, but also you can apply different strategies with different groups, right? If something's not working out for your main group, well, maybe it's time to bring the accountability group in and have them, be a little bit more aggressive with the asks. Or maybe it's, specifically there's something going along with public land uses as it relates to military. You're going to want your veterans for that group. Here's another thing. Does anyone in your community already have a relationship with the office? That is a big deal when you're trying to make these asks, especially right now in an election year. It can be really difficult to lock in these members of Congress, especially when you're kind of just asking them out of the blue. So, as you're going to Chamber of Commerce meetings, which is something I also recommend if you're looking for business supporters, as you're going to these meetings and start to find potential folks that you think, hey, I'd like this person to be my group, ask them if they already have any connections. A lot of them will, as we've already evaluated. Electeds play a big part in helping with agencies, and local governments will help businesses get their license. Folks will know folks that you can talk to. So don't be afraid to ask people if they know the office or anyone who does, and integrate those at kind of you just work your way out from this initial group that you built out of your strategy map. So, okay, you got your group built, you've got your target, and you've got kind of what you want to talk about. How are you going to get out there and actually go talk to them? So the first disclosure here is we're going to talk about mobile office hours and district meetings. Mobile office hours, if you're confused what they are, it may be because your district does not do them. It depends on who your representative is, but mobile office hours are basically a short little regular held meeting somewhere in your community that the member of Congress or sometimes member of the state legislature holds. It's going to be their member of staff. You're typically not meeting with the actual Congress member, and members of the community can come in, share their comments, and then leave. It's really helpful because it's a constant and something where you can mobilize folks to get in there. But at the beginning of last year, after a lot of pretty raucous town halls for the GOP, leadership there advised their folks to no longer conduct town halls or kind of forward-facing things like this. There are a number of Republicans in California who have opted to continue doing them despite that advice from leadership. And so I don't know what each of your individual situations is, but check out their websites and you'll typically find something. For the Democrat side, they hold these pretty frequently as well. They were a lot more common, at least out here with the Republican offices, but Democrat offices do these in town halls frequently. So, as we're trying to reach everyone and bring the biggest public lands tent we can, check both of your legislators. And if you have folks on both sides of the aisle in your area, check what they're doing because it can be a great way. Party lines does not mean anything, does not mean guarantees for protecting public lands. We have to educate folks on both sides of the aisle and make sure that they're taking the right action. So don't neglect one side over the other. Um, Mobile office hours are really short. You can bring a group or you could just go solo. You typically get to run in, give your comment, and it's a big room full of people queued up to give comment, and then you leave. It's really effective to meet staff though. So you can start building relationships with the same staff, which ultimately, when you get to the point where you need a bigger ask, you'll have someone that you already know at the office. So check locally, see if mobile office hours are there, but we're going to spend most of the time talking about district meetings, which are kind of the ultimate aspiration of where we want to get anyway. So district meetings are when you or a constituent or anyone else recommends a meeting with the congressperson's office. Anyone can do this provided that they are a constituent, have a legitimate topic to talk about. And but I'll say there's no guarantee on how soon you get a response or that you actually meet with the Congress member. It could still be staff. These you have a lot more control over. You get to choose who's going to be in the room, right? When you go to the mobile office hours, you're kind of there with whoever's there. And if they're badly representing your issue, you can't really do anything about it. But if you're in a district meeting, you've selected folks, and I recommend 3 to 6 so that you have varied perspectives, but so you're also not outnumbering staff. You don't want to kind of create a big, competition of folks talking over each other. You want to create space. So 3 to 6 is usually a pretty good, safe amount. These are going to be a little bit longer, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. And you're typically going to meet with the field representative and district director. If the issue is urgent enough or you've built enough rapport, it is possible to meet with the member of Congress, and even more likely when you're over in DC. So speaking as a former member of, a congressional staff, these types of meetings have a pretty good impact on how they actually show up to the legislator, even if they're not in the room. And that's because these legislators get a weekly report that's compiled for them of all the folks that have district meetings with the write-up of what the asks were and everything like that. So these really do get through to the folks. That's the same as your phone calls and letters, by the way, but the district meetings get a much more granular level of write-up. Here, you want to introduce yourself, spend 3 to 5 minutes talking, and basically keep it short, keep it sweet, and focused. And we'll talk about doing an ask here because I know we're moving through. So we already talked about this. Review your legislators' backgrounds, pick your 2 to 3 issues, write down your asks, and if you're joining a group, establish what each of you are going to cover. Also, a note taker. So when we're developing our asks, this is probably the most crucial part. A lot of folks develop their asks as if they're making their dying wish to their congressperson, like they're never going to speak to them again, right? Like it's I want to get everything out there and they just kind of spill it and then don't follow up or anything. We want to do the opposite. We want to have a very short, easy to remember ask, and you're going to build upon it on relationships with time permitting, more facts and things like that. But at the end of the day, think of your ask as an elevator pitch. Members of Congress schedule themselves in minutes intervals. So if you only get that 1 minute when they're out the door, what are you going to say to them? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So aim for a sentence. You can support your ask afterwards, right? But the ask should be the first thing that you get out when you're talking to this member. If it's the only thing you have time for, this is what you're going to say. Then you can come back and start supporting it with examples in your community, examples in the work you do. The most crucial part here, share your personal experiences, the experiences of the folks that you brought to the meeting with you. Lots of folks will come to these meetings I see and they got like a bunch of things printed out and they just start reading off what they saw in the news. And it doesn't have the same impact. These members of Congress have staff that compile these massive press booklets. They've seen the article, but that's not going to separate you out from the 5,000 other people asking for or against this thing. Share your personal experiences. Why is this important to you? What does that piece of public land that you're defending mean to you? Did you learn how to camp there? Did you first go fishing there? Whatever it may be, add that type of stuff because it makes it your story. You can support it with all that other stuff, but you need to bring the one thing that only you have, which is your experience with public lands. These are the type of things legislators want to talk about on the floor and use when they defend their positions. Then bring supporting documents. You could share those afterwards, hand them over to them, spend your time talking with what comes out of here. Some quick tips to keep in mind when we're doing this. Always be polite to staff and other meeting participants, especially, these staff, a lot of them are entry level, straight out of college. They don't necessarily agree with everything their boss says. And at the end of the day, even if they do, it doesn't give us a right to be rude to them. And it certainly does us no favors in arguing for what we want them to do if we are rude. In the same vein, open with a thank you. You don't have to love this person. You don't even have to really be thankful for something. If you can't think of something that they've done that you do agree with or that you are thankful for, thank them for meeting with you. Thank them for listening to you. Take notes. That's important for the accountability, for words matter when politicians use them. And so having a note taker really will ensure that you remember what they say after their kind of initial rush leaves after the meeting. Make sure your topic is relevant. We're not going to a congressperson with a piece of state legislation or vice versa, or coming to a local government person with a federal ask. Make sure you've done enough homework that demonstrates, that it's going to be a productive conversation. This is my favorite one. If you're asked a question and you don't know the answer, we're going to use this as a tool to basically take a second swing at the office. And so it is always okay to say, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I'll follow up with you later, because that gives us the opportunity to follow up with them later. So typically you'll get their email. You'll be able to then put all of your asks again in writing, remind them of what you were coming in there for, and send it to them. Now you have that person's email. Now you have the ability to follow up with them and have a dialogue. And so you can use that at a later time, but always be unafraid to say you don't know. That was one of the things that they told us in the offices as well when we're talking to elected folks. Say you don't know. It gives you another reason to come talk to this person with an incredibly busy schedule who otherwise it might have gone in and out. You get a second chance now to say what you wanted to. You can always hand it over to other participants. That's why I like having a coalition member lead these. And then Again, because I told you I was going to say it again, keep your experience with public lands at the heart of the story. After the meeting, remember this is a relationship, not the one meeting. You want to plan for the next time, follow up, thank them, share those references, provide new information, something else you just thought of. If you have contact with DC staff, send them a note because there's a disconnect often between district and DC offices in terms of who's telling who what. So if you know folks in both sides of the office, feel free to summarize what your meeting was and again, just reiterate those asks. Work your way towards something more concrete. A tour of your favorite public lands, a tour of the area that you want, of your organizations, of some of the great work you're doing, to meet your volunteers, any of these types of things. It's really important to get folks onto the land, but I think you probably all, I think I'm preaching to the choir on that one. We want to work these folks towards ownership of public land issues. That doesn't happen unless we engage them, right? Especially if they're in a district maybe with a little less public lands. So we have to be persistent in these tours. It took us months and months and months of asking Representative Calvert before we got him to an economic roundtable, but we did get there. And it wasn't because we did something magic. It was because we were persistent in working with his calendar, working with his staff to do it. So don't get discouraged. Members of Congress are a nightmare to schedule with. There's no denying of that. But especially when you're working in great groups like this, you can pull together to do it. Just start early. Know that your timelines are probably not going to line up exactly as you wanted to, but you will get there and it gets easier after you make that first foot in the door. So, like I said at the bottom, once you do feel you're at that part, consider something bigger like an economic roundtable or something that is topical to your member. And so that is our abridged version here. I know I went over a moment there, Melanie, so I apologize, but I will take any questions.
Great, thanks, Christian. Cassie has a question in the chat. Is there any situation where using an AI note taker, aka recording the meeting, would be acceptable?
With legislators,
I think that's the intent, yes.
yeah, I will say that AI is such a touchy subject for different folks. So before I even asked a member of Congress if they were okay with that, I would try to look up and see what their stance is on AI. If we're talking Democrats, you're going to have a much more probably opposed view to doing that. There's a lot of data concerns is the main part, as I understand. And I can tell you in the coalitions I'm in, folks don't like AI note takers. However, one of my local congressperson, Jay Obernolte, he has a PhD in artificial intelligence, and like he can't get enough of that type of stuff. He's on the only member of Congress with such a degree, and so he has a much more positive view of AI, where actually that might be a nice way to start a conversation with someone like that, right? Because they kind of are the outliers and say, "Hey, I know you're into AI, blah 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 blah." 90% of the time, I would advise against it. The other reason for it is, a lot of members of Congress, right or wrong, are still very old school, and not just in the tools they use, but also in the way that they view those tools. And so, my initial thought would be, especially with some of those kind of older school legislators, is that they view it as disrespectful in some way, or that we're not giving them our full, we didn't take the time to write it down. It's absurd, sure, but just know that you're working with a group of folks who have more old school ideals on what the workplace looks like.
Great, thank you. And then looks like we've got Carla's hand up.
Yes, thank you for doing this. I'm a former congressional staffer, so it's really refreshing to see that all of this is like in a presentation and shared with everyone. My question is more so on the state side.
Yeah.
We do work with federal legislators, but since Trump took office, we kind of shifted to like working with the state, and our main representative is now in a leadership role. It's Senator Limon,
Oh,
and
yes.
she's trying to figure out her new role. And we're kind of like tap dancing around like what she can actually do and how she can participate. Is there any advice you can give us on how we can better support her in her role? Because we've met with her now, like, I want to say like 5 times since she took this new leadership role, and we're still trying to figure out what she can and can't do. So I was just wondering if you had some words of advice.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think something that's important because the state legislature, you get a lot more refreshes of who you're dealing with, and with new freshmen that need to kind of, you need to do all the groundwork again to make sure that they're on the same page as you. So that's a great question. It is wonderful to try to kind of give these folks some easy balls early on. I know that Senator Limon is looking at, she has a spot bill right now. Um, I think it says right now that it's related to 30 by 30, but if I'm correct. She said it's going to be something else related to public lands. The easiest thing we can do for these folks initially is if they've got good bills or we have ideas for kind of, easy ball, softball bills that we can bring to them, is to support those, but also to act as resources to these offices because one of the things just to that idea of new freshmen that I see really often is that someone comes out with really good intentions. They want to do something. They want to introduce this bill that shows they're a public lands champion, but they've never been involved in conservation. And all of a sudden, they made a bunch of loopholes for solar and other renewable development, not understanding that maybe those two shouldn't coexist on the same spot, right? Their intentions were good, but they just didn't have that knowledge. So I think it's excellent that you're already meeting with the senator and kind of starting to pick it up on there. I think it's continuing to educate, make sure like what us as a coalition, us as a group are concerned by, and some of the kind of background because they just don't come with that type of thing. Otherwise, I think what you can do is find other bills or ideas of bills that you are supportive of and kind of have her put her weight behind that and start shepherding some of them through. That's going to be some of the best ways to do it, I think personally. The other area here is that we're living in quite a weird time in the state, alluding to the first thing you said, Carla, which is that you're having to rely on the state more because of the situation with the federal government. That is a position that I think, especially leadership in the state, really should get behind. Because at the end of the day, we're now taking over, we have a state version of the Endangered Species Act of basically anything that falls off the federal list. There's another bill about public lands that gets sold off. So I think really showing Senator Limon where the holes are in the federal government right now that the state can take a leadership position to is a really powerful thing. Another one area, obviously, being that she's in the legislature, is around Prop 4 things and making sure that those get out and allocated. That's one of the top requests I think probably every enviro group in California is looking at. So that's an area that is in, very much in need of leadership and ensuring to get out. So those are the areas I would start approaching here. But I think you're already doing a great job if you met with her, you said 5 times already. That's excellent. I think you're already doing what you should be. So I hope there was something in there I said that was useful.
Uh, she said thanks in the chat. Any other questions?
I have another one. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, we know that Governor Newsom's getting ready to exit. Um, how, as an organization, can we better position ourselves to be there for the new administration and pitch good bills, moving forward? Or how do you go about establishing that relationship with the agencies since there's going to be turnover?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's I think one of the biggest concerns, right? We're the governor's going to be out of office here. There's a lot of programs that he set up or really championed that kind of we want to see continue. 30 by 30 is an obvious example, right? And so how do we maintain both our relationships with the offices and kind of the momentum of those things going forward? So I think to whatever level you're engaged with staff already, remember that not all of them are going to change, right? The appointees might change and things like that, but a lot of the other folks are still going to be there. Make sure you really have a relationship with the folks actually doing the work, I guess is what I would say. So like not just the heads of certain departments or stuff like that, but like the grants coordinator, if that's something you really depend on. That person's probably not going anywhere with the government, with the governor administration. That's one of the main areas we've kind of been actually even talking to the state right now about and asking them the same question. Is literally posing as our 30 by as our power in nature group, and speaking to them and saying like, we really want to see 30 by 30 continue under the new governor. How can we help? What outreach can we be doing? Again, a lot of these folks are still going to be there. Like, sure, the leadership positions are gonna, refresh, but the main bulk of those folks that have been doing the work are going to be there. ask them how you can help advance it. Make sure that you're really communicating about these great programs and things like that. But ultimately, just I think similar to what you've been doing with the senators, have extra check-ins, especially this year, being that as we run up to the end of fall, folks are going to be really hard to talk to. I know the state is still planning things, CNRA is planning things all the way up to like December, but in reality, in terms of substantial conversations, you really want to have those by like October. You might have some folks start leaving. So reach out to them, make sure that, if there's anyone in your contact list or a program that your organization depends on, make sure you know the folks managing that and you should be okay. Other than that, though, I think that that's a question we're all trying to ask is how do we keep the state programs going into the next year? I think no matter who it is, they're going to, see that California's been largely under attack from the federal administration. So the more we can encourage them to keep taking those protective actions and keep up their proactive work like 30 by 30, then we'll be good to go.
All right. Last call for questions. Anything else? Good questions so far. All right, I'm not seeing any hands go up. So Krystian, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay. Oh, we're getting a thank you from Melina. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but I don't know how relevant it will be for you. So
No problem. I will hop, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here anytime. And folks can always email me if they've got any questions.